Thanks for joining us on another For Investors, by Investors South Bay podcast. As always, we are proud to be your all-education real estate investment resource without any kind of sales pitch. If you would like to attend one of our meetings in person, we meet the second Wednesday of the month at The Point in El Segundo. You can RSVP at forinvestorsbyinvestors.com/South Bay. To find more investment resources such as blogs and podcasts from other FIBI groups, go to forinvestorsbyinvestors.com and search our library. Now, on to the podcast.
Well, thank you guys for joining us today. We really appreciate you guys supporting us. For those of you guys who do not know, For Investors by Investors is pending nonprofit status. We are in the process of the paperwork to get that done, so we'll be a formal nonprofit pretty soon. And for those of you guys who haven't heard of us, who's new here? First time here. Okay, cool. So for those of you guys who don't know, For Investors by Investors was started by a couple of full-time investors. One is here, Ellis, and then the other one was Jeremy Roll, and then Dave and I became partners afterwards. But they were tired of going to these networking clubs and getting pitched to boot camps and the book and tape sets and the next flavor of the month. And so they decided to start FIBI, which stands for For Investors by Investors, that doesn't do any sales pitch, strictly teaching and education and networking without that sales pitch. And we realized that basically Dave and I run this group in Manhattan Beach. I run the Long Beach group, and then we have a number of chapters throughout Southern California that you guys can find on meetup.com or our website at forinvestorsbyinvestors.com. So we are typically recording the podcast as well as a Facebook live stream. We get a lot of blogs and things like that from our speakers that are professionals in what they do, and they have a ton of experience in each one of the topics as we bring them on. And so we try to provide as much education and content as possible, mostly because we try to add value, because we realize that we try to develop the relationships with everybody here, because everybody has resources that we can all utilize for our own businesses, for real estate, and we can help each other. That's the whole point. None of us have the same resources. We can all have different skill sets, different time availability, different capital sources, different property sources, and skill sets to be able to help with those processes. So thank you guys for joining us today. Dave is going to talk a little bit about FIBI as a whole and this chapter specifically. So,
yeah, how you guys doing? Good. Thanks for coming. So a couple things kind of following off what Matt was talking about. First of all, just some logistics. If you want to get up, there's areas in the back to go hang out. I know sometimes, a 2-hour conversation about real estate investing might require you to stretch your legs a little bit. Feel free to do that. There's drinks behind the door over here. Just go around the back. And if you have to use the restrooms, when you walk back out front, you can grab a key fob, and the restrooms are down by where the stairs that came up the building. As Matt mentioned, we're all about education and networking, and really the key thing that I think, besides the education you're going to get, we got a great panel tonight talking about real estate notes. The networking is the magic of FIBI, and that's really where getting a chance to not just to hear what these guys have to say up here, but there's a lot of brain power in this room as well. So meeting like-minded people. Clearly, not everyone in the world would spend a Wednesday night to come hear a bunch of people talk about real estate note investing. So you all share that, right? So use that as a way to connect with each other and find resources, and really that's the art of investing, is it's just meeting good people. Part of how we put this club together is we do it through sponsorships. We've got a couple sponsors we want to thank. I know Corey's here from More Financial. Corey, where are you at? There he is. So Corey, those guys do some hard money lending. Thank you guys. We've got Jeff with UDirect.
Not for hard money.
Really? You have to start that for him?
That's awesome.
So Jeff with UDirect's back here. These guys do IRA accounts. So if you're looking to invest with your retirement accounts, that's someone you want to talk to. I know we've got someone, actually I know for a fact that we don't have anyone from South Bay Tax and Financial Consulting, because we won't see him for another month, maybe. Right? 2 more weeks to finish and then 2 more weeks to decompress in the Bahamas.
5 days.
5 days, that's it?
Yes,
that's it, and then you're out. We've got someone from Spiro Woodward here. There you go, thank you. So Spiro Woodward is a big legal firm here in the South Bay. They do a lot of real estate and business type of consulting. So if you guys need someone like that, thanks for showing up. And then, is anyone here from Farmers Insurance? So our local Farmers office, Jesse Navarro, New Western Acquisitions.
I'm here. Credit card committee detail.
Perfect. So these guys do wholesaling, like on a mass scale. So if you're looking to acquire stuff, we'll talk to these guys. And then Walker Dunlop is a commercial lender. Is Andrew here? No. Okay. So those are our sponsors. We've got some information on the back. Help yourself. Other than that, anything? Oh, also, this is purely about education and networking. This is not meant to be legal advice or tax advice. So if you have any questions, we actually have a couple of, I think, CPAs and attorneys in here. Certainly consult your own, personal advisors on any specific questions about your situation. Same thing for tonight. We have some questions that we've pre-written about notes. If you've got a question, please raise your hand. We'll get to as many questions as we can. If you've got a very personal question about your situation, that might be better to do it North Italia after the panel. So once we're done here, we're going to try to finish up at 9 o'clock as quickly as we can, right on time. Then everyone goes down to North Italia, which is just on the other side of the courtyard down here. We have the whole patio reserved. We've got appetizers, grab a drink. That's a great place to meet people, exchange cards, and set up conversations for later in the week. All right, so with that, as Matt mentioned, part of, Ellis here is one of the founders of FIBI. So Ellis, when you do your introduction, also talk about the podcast that we're starting to talk about for FIBI as well.
It's okay to talk about that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm really excited about this because the content of the FIBI is so rich and so valuable that it just makes sense to be able to broadcast this virtually. So Matt and I are actually going to get in a call on Monday and discuss how we're going to start broadcasting basically FIBI content. We'll have guests, we'll have question and answer, we'll have hot topics, and we'll also talk about what's happening in the investment environment today. So especially being in LA and trying to get to these meetings, we really appreciate it. But there are times when there's people out there that they just can't physically be here, so we want to reach out to everybody and just give out another way to connect with the FIBI team, because I think we owe it to you guys to really push that content out there and to make more connections.
That's awesome. So keep going, introduce yourself.
Okay, so my name is Ellis San Jose. I started in real estate in 1989. Bought my first property, a duplex in Oxnard, California. Before that, I worked for a foreclosure group. We would buy property at the courthouse steps. So my college experience was like, wake up early, go look at properties, go to the bank, get cashier's checks, go to the sale, then get to school in time for my business class, and sleep, and then rinse and repeat every day. Right. So that was kind of my entry into real estate. And when I was a stockbroker for many years, and I was just getting really frustrated because I just felt there was such a lack of control over the investments. Did I really have control over how these stocks went up or down? And I how could I help my clients? Because I felt there was kind of a missing piece. And then I started investing in real estate again when I was a stockbroker, because was anybody here in 1989 when the market took a big dump back then? Yeah, that was ugly, right? Not as ugly as it was this last term, but I got out of real estate for a while. I went and became a stockbroker, but then I started getting back into it again because I saw a guy by the name of Bruce Norris, who people are nodding their heads. If you're going to be in real estate in California, you got to follow Bruce Norris, right? So he put out this report about how real estate was going to double and triple, and I was like, is this just BS or is it for real? And I looked at his data and go, this looks real. So I started buying real estate, and thank God I did, because I quit my job and started to buy foreclosures again, but it was really tough. And then I was talking to one of my mentors, and he said, well, why don't you just buy the note instead of pounding your head against the wall? I was like, well, what's that? And he said, come here, young grasshopper, let me teach you. So I was like all ears. And then, it really turned it around for me, because I bought my first note, and people probably get tired of this, hear me talk, but I bought my first note for $800. Okay, so I figured, even if I screwed it up, my wife will kick me out of the house. So I bought it for $800. Long story short, it went into bankruptcy, so I started freaking out, but it actually turned out to be a good thing, because at the end of the rainbow, I collected like $16,000 off of the note. Right? So ever since then, I'm hooked on paper. So I buy property and paper, but I love paper. So.
Thank you.
Ellis actually told me a story one time about how he calls it on that first deal that you do in real estate, he calls it real estate crack. So once you do that first one, you're pretty much hooked at that point going forward.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I'm Josh Shear. I'm an attorney. Shear Law Group is the name of the firm. So I started when I was a little kid because my father was doing this initially and running a firm in Northern California. So I was working for my father, kind of seeing the ins and outs of the legal profession, and for some reason ended up doing it. I'm not quite sure why. But we represent lenders, so we represent credit unions, investors, anything real estate related, but we do the loss mitigation and prevention side. So we try and keep you guys out of trouble with your policies and procedures, and then when you get in trouble, you come see us again, and we hope it hasn't gone that bad. But I moved out here to Southern California about 1.5 years ago. We have a firm up in the Bay Area, which my father still runs. He's been doing that for about 35 years now. And I came out here to start our Southern California office with my family. I have 2 kids under 2 right now, so I am up,
Not sleeping.
up all the time. I'll put it that way.
He's not skiing either.
Definitely not skiing, yeah, I wish. So I came out here to kind of see our Southern California base and get a stronghold on here, because this is a great place for real property investments, a great place to be as well. I mean, it's a great area to live in. So I can't complain after living in San Francisco for 10 years where you can't even buy a house and you can't rent anything for under $4,000 or $5,000 a month. So I came out here and I've been dealing with mainly investors since I got here, because that's kind of been the bread and butter of the firm, is to try and get to know the investors a little more and kind of get the personal touch as to what you guys are doing, as opposed to just dealing with the big Bank of America, Wells Fargo type people. So that's kind of what we deal with. We see everything from start to finish, from the origination of the loan and disclosures relating to what you can and can't do for commercial versus residential lending, to the loss mitigation aspect, what you do when it comes to bankruptcy. I got into this area of law in 2005. I initially thought I was going to be a sports agent, and decided that definitely was not for me and that this was an area I wanted to be in. So I saw the ups and the downs from 2005 when the bankruptcy code changed, and the market was up and everything was going great, to the big crash and everything in between. So I've kind of seen the good and the bad and what to do and not to do, and I've learned from one of the best attorneys around here that does the same thing. So.
Cool. Gerald?
All right. My name's Gerald Lemoyne, and I started out in real estate in Colorado. I was living in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and I had bought a lot out there that I was planning to build a house on, and then I ended up realizing that I didn't want to live 30 miles outside of town in the snow, the winter time over there. So I sold that lot, and I made money on it. And so then I started buying other lots in that same area. And the way I bought them was by looking up the delinquent property taxes and owners that had bought a lot and not done anything with it for 20 years. It's just a vacant piece of land sitting there. And so I ended up buying about 35 lots, improved the roads, put in utilities, and then sold them all off and made like $150,000 on it. We had bought it for $300,000 and sold it for $450,000. So I said, "Wow, this is pretty good." And that was in about a 2-year time frame. But I had no idea that clubs like this existed. I was just kind of a lone wolf out there. I was just by myself doing this. Just, hey, this is some pretty land. Someone's going to want it if I fix it up and market it. And then it worked out. And then I moved out here. Actually, I moved to Redondo Beach. One of my first jobs out here was over at ExxonMobil. Spent some time there, and then worked at Chevron El Segundo. I worked in the construction industry. I was a project manager. And I was just looking to buy a house for myself. I had met my wife. We were dating and thought, it'd probably be good for us to have a house. And so I went and saw Ward Hannigan speak, who to me was a great teacher. I saw him down in Huntington Beach at the Belterra area. And Ward made real estate sound so interesting, and I thought, hey, I could make a living at this. I had some money saved up, so I ended up quitting my job. I took Ward's training, and about a year later, I quit my job, July of 2005. And my wife is like, well, I hope you know what you're doing, you know. And I got married July 4th and quit my job like right about the same time, you know. So I got married and quit my job simultaneously.
Yeah, right. Can you get an annulment at that point? Is it you have to go through the process?
You know, I was out door knocking houses, and well, you know, the first thing we did was take a month off and go to Europe. You know, it was like corners. That was our honeymoon. You know, Italy and Switzerland and France, and came back and decided, hey, I better get to work, otherwise our savings is going to be gone. And so I was out door knocking houses. Like one of the first houses I bought was in Culver City, not far from here, and you know, it was on a foreclosure list, and I door knocked the lady, and she had a foreclosure the next week coming up. This was Saturday morning, and she had a foreclosure coming up on Wednesday. So I helped her delay the foreclosure, and we worked out a deal, and ended up buying that house, and helped her move out, found her an apartment, and we fixed that house up and sold it the summer of 2007. So the market was starting to turn. And my real estate agent says, you know, Gerald, we were trying to sell it for like about $800,000. He said, Gerald, we better dump this thing and get out of it. And so we did. We marked it down to like $699.5, and we sold it, and we still made $100,000 on it. It was a good deal, and that was my very first real estate transaction. And it was basically everything that Ward had taught me, and Rick Harmon had helped me out on some probate issues, and so it was all about, you know, the collective thoughts of this kind of a group. And then so that was pretty much, like you said, the on crack cocaine. You know, the real estate crack had me. Wow, you know, that's more than I usually make in a year. You know, and so it worked out pretty good. And then a few years later, I discovered the note business, and Ellis and I had actually partnered up on some deals. We had the note guys. You know, we were the note guys, and so in fact, we just settled a note that we had bought 3 years ago. It was, you know, we've done about 500 notes since I got started, and this was in the top 1% of the worst notes we could possibly buy. So even though we have some success stories, there's also some horror stories. And I mean, our legal fees on this thing is probably $20,000 on this note, you know, because we just had a hard-headed borrower that just refused to pay us, and we just kept pushing and pushing, and he kept pushing back, and just a pain in the butt. But anyhow, I discovered the note business in 2008 and fell in love with it. My skill set suited the note business. It was like, I like the things that I do. I don't have to drive around and deal with contractors. And when I'm doing rehabs, you know, the contractor doesn't show up, or the material's not right, or whatever, so you're driving all over the place. And with the note business, I do all over the United States. We have notes in like 25 different states, and most of that is over the telephone and the computer. And so I sit in my office, and I'm on the phone and the computer a lot, handling issues with the note business. So anyhow, enough of the introduction, but that's how I got started in this business.
How many FIBI panels have you been on notes? I'm thinking this is probably your third or fourth?
Not when you consider all the chapters.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, I've probably done a dozen of them or so.
And how many have you done?
Oh, a ton.
This is like having, like, you know, John Goodman and Alec Baldwin here. There's been so many note panels over the years. You figure that out.
Okay.
Well, my name is Matthew Owens. I'm a California licensed CPA that doesn't do taxes, so don't ask me. Look, I'm here, and you know, so I should be in the Bahamas right now, anyways, because I'm not doing taxes. But so I flip full time. I quit my CPA firm job about 10 years ago. I flip about 5 to 10 houses a month out of state. I invest in syndications. I buy multifamilies and value add those. Invest in a ton of different asset classes, and help investors with their cash flow strategies and their investments. And I specialize in a lot of legal and tax structuring associated with their investments as a whole. So we have it's better, as I was telling Josh earlier, it's a lot better than, you know, doing the tax stuff and the audit stuff. You know, even though it's a lot harder, there's a lot more team members involved that can cost you money, and but at the same time, it's you learn every day. when I quit my CPA firm job, I can honestly tell you that I felt awake and alive for the first time, instead of sitting there going, you know, I don't care about networking at a CPA firm because they're going to give you 2% of the profits in the first year for bringing in a client, and that's it. Now I'm like networking constantly because, you know, it all goes towards the business and helping other people at the same time, and mutual benefits for each other. So it's a great business to be in. So that's it.
My name's David Coe. I'm a realtor here. Welcome to Keller Williams. This is our office. We deal with local, both dealing with residential and some commercial real estate, dealing with homeowners and dealing with investors as well. We really like the stress stuff. Really complicated stuff is what we specialize in, and part of that is because as a note investor also, you really get to see kind of the seedy underbelly of dealing with, you know, financial problems, and trying to solve those things creatively works in regular real estate as it does in note investing, because ultimately it's just a person on the other end that you're trying to make a deal with. So. And that's a lot of what notes is. You know, as Gerald mentioned, you're not dealing with the contractors, you're not dealing with the physical properties. Really, what you're dealing with is you're dealing with people and their financial situation, and situations with the house as well. But that's ultimately what you're trying to solve when you're buying notes. So let's get into it specifically. And actually, Josh, I'm going to give you the first question since you're the attorney. Why don't you talk about like what is a note, and talk about how notes can how notes can be different structures in different states.
Okay. Yeah, a note generally, it's a promise to pay on a contract. So a borrower is borrowing money from a lender and promising to pay it back. So you're purchasing a contract is really what you're doing. And these notes are secured by real property. So there's something attached to it. It's not just going out and buying the particular contract, it's buying the contract that's attached to a note. So you need to know the details of not only the note that you're buying, the person that's attached to it, but the property that it's attached to. So if you're investing, for example, in Idaho, and you have no idea about Idaho property or Idaho foreclosure law, and you're buying a note there, you're going to have significant problems. On the other hand, if you're investing in Newport Beach and you know what the property's like, you know the values, you buy a note that's attached to that, at least you know you have some valid security. So the idea is that you are purchasing these notes, and a lot of these we can talk about how they're purchased and ways to do it. I think Gerald can give you a better idea of that. But you're purchasing a document that is secured by another document that is on real property. So it's a promise to pay. So they're making ongoing payments every month, just like you on your mortgage, every month, and you get the right to those payments by purchasing that note.
And then Ellis, there are notes that are performing notes and notes that are non-performing notes. Talk a little bit about the different kinds of notes, and also whether it's different for residential versus commercial.
Okay, so performing notes are when the lender's receiving payments as agreed, right? So usually when you're buying those, you're basically buying a yield, right? And hopefully you're still buying at a discount. When you're looking at the non-performing space, which I know Gerald and I really love that part of the space, it's where there's a problem. And if you know how to solve problems, that's when you can really benefit. So in many cases, for whatever reason, the borrower has not been making payments, and whatever financial institution or note holder at that time is saying, look, I don't want to deal with this anymore, it's not what I want to do, and they sell it off to a note buyer or another hedge fund or whatever that looks for this type of distress. So you asked me about residential and commercial. The basic structure is the same in most cases. There usually is a lot more documentation for a commercial note. There's many more clauses, et cetera, that are in there. But for me, why I tend to stay with a residential note is that I can kind of understand what's going on. This is a person's where they live. And when you're negotiating with them, it's, for me, I feel I can kind of connect with them as a human being. When it's a commercial note, it's really all about the numbers. And some of the ugliest litigation battles I've ever seen have been with commercial notes, because in many cases they have a lot of money to kind of delay it and make it very painful, and then you have a lot of attorneys come in, and it ends up being not that great of a time anymore. sure the attorneys love it because they're getting paid, but it's just not.
Just there to help.
Yeah, it's not something that I really like to do.
Josh will get it taken care of really quick for cheap money, right?
But I was just telling Josh that I look for issues where I know I have a good attorney on my side that can say, okay, here's what's going to go on, Ellis, and here's what you got to plan for. So there is that. But I try to keep my life very simple. So I really try to stress looking at residential notes.
It's mostly emotional more than versus, when you're a lot more emotional when you're dealing with residential, I can imagine, versus commercial, on that aspect of things, I would assume.
And I will say on the residential, although there are a lot of regulations on the commercial,
Yes.
residential, at least recently, I mean, you have the CFPB, you have state regulations that really do limit what you can do, and they're minefields if you don't know what you're doing. So if you end up buying a note and you don't understand the whole residential process, it's going to be a problem, and it's different in every state as well.
And I have to say though, also, when I say what's the first thing you need to know when you buy notes, you got to understand the collateral. So if I have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that I have a note on, that's something that I feel is pretty liquid. I could rent it, I could sell it. There's a lot of things I could do with it. But if there's a 20,000 square foot warehouse that used to have OSHA problems and they've dumped some chemicals or something, that's a whole other world where you can't necessarily rent that out really quickly. The appraisals are going to be all over the board, so you have to have deeper pockets, I think, to deal with that type of collateral.
So you're saying basically, the success in a note can very well have to do with your ability to solve problems as it relates to the real estate as well as the note in itself.
Yeah, you have to be able to figure out people and then figure out the real estate too. So, understand the collateral is what I always tell people. You got to understand the collateral.
So you talked about buying seconds, and I know you buy first also. Talk a little bit about first, seconds, and other kinds of notes, and also talk about, I know we there's private notes and there's institutional notes. Talk about that different source of note as well.
Sure. I started off buying first primarily for the first 2 or 3 years that I was buying notes, and they were all institutional. They were all originated by a major bank like Chase or Wells Fargo or Citi, as opposed to private notes that someone might sell a house and carry back a second mortgage. So that's like a private note. Like Kathleen sold a house and they didn't have enough money to pay for the house, so they carried back a second mortgage. Or you could have loaned money to a friend or a family member. Maybe you loan a friend $100,000 to help their business or something, and it's secured by real estate. So that's a private note also. But the bulk of the notes we bought in the beginning were institutional notes. I bought a lot of first, and then about 2010 or 11, I started discovering the seconds. And a lot of people think that seconds are more risky than first, and I haven't found that to be the case. I mean, the low-value first mortgages like Columbus, Ohio, or Dayton, Ohio, or Pittsburgh. There's a lot of notes out there where the house is worth $50,000 or $75,000. I had one in Memphis that was worth $35,000 for a condo. There's not much room for error there. If you pencil in a certain amount of money for the rehab, and it turns out to be twice as much, it basically takes all the profit out of the deal. And one of the things that I've noticed on seconds is there's a lot more opportunity for home runs. We bought a note a while back in Arizona for $12,000, and 3 years later, just a couple of months ago, we collected about $117,000 on it. And I've never done that on a first mortgage. I've gotten decent payments. We might make 10, 15, 20% yield, return on investment, but I've never had that kind of 10 times what I paid for the note, payback on the deal. So in performing, we just bought a performing note up in Sacramento. It was a first mortgage, $390,000 unpaid balance. So the principal amount owed to us was $390,000. I think we paid like $200 for that note. So we bought it at a discount. The property was worth $365,000, and the payments are $1,600 a month, interest only. So it wasn't as high of a yield. It was like a 10% yield, which is a little bit below our margin. But we thought we could probably talk the homeowner into refining us out. So we're going to collect about $310 on that. He's in the process of doing a refi, so we'll get paid off $310 on that deal. We have about $200,000 invested in it right now, so it'll be a nice return for us. And that's something that you don't know how it's going to turn out. One of the things about notes is when you start negotiating with a homeowner, you might buy the note thinking you're going to get the house back because you want to buy the house at a discount. You can flip it, fix it up and sell it. But you might find a homeowner that really wants to hang on to their property, and they'll fight you tooth and nail. They'll file bankruptcy. They'll get an attorney like Josh, and it'll be just a battle.
Josh is getting beat up right now.
So you in the middle.
You never can predict. Some of the ones that I thought, this house will be easy. I'm going to own it. They can't really afford it. They end up borrowing money from a family member, and they end up paying you. So a lot of times these turn into cash flow as opposed to a lump sum of cash coming in later.
So what I got out of that is that when you're looking at acquiring a note, you want to look at all the different exit strategies, which include holding it and repositioning the note, getting them to refinance and pay you off, as well as looking at the underlying collateral to say, if I had to take it back and rehab it, can I still make a profit on that note? And there's a big difference between having something with equity, and then there are notes you can buy that don't have a lot of equity or they're pretty break even. My understanding is that in those types of situations, it's always better to buy in bulk versus buying one-offs because the one-offs can have problems. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Sure. I always tell people that, like my investors, I work with a dozen or so people that have money with me, and I like to buy a basket of notes. If you've got $100,000 to spend, don't go out and buy one note for $100,000. Buy 10 notes for $10,000 each. It's like, when Ellis was a stockbroker, it was the diversification. It was like buying a mutual fund, where you have a basket of stocks. I like to have a basket of notes. And I always look at the portfolio return. We have notes that knock it out of the park. We'll get 10 times what we paid for it. But then we have other notes, like the one in Miami that Ellis and I are dealing with right now, where we lose, $15,000 or $20,000 on the deal. So, and the other thing about notes too, and David and I were talking about this earlier, is that notes are not like flipping houses. You might buy a note and you hang on to it for 3 years, waiting for the right time. You try to negotiate with the homeowner, but if you can't, if there's not enough equity where you can foreclose and take the house and sell it, you're better off continuing to work with the homeowner, maybe get some small payments, like $200 a month coming in for the time being, and then do a temporary modification. Then later on, when they can afford it, they'll pay you more, or you may end up getting them to refi the property. But I think that covered it.
I think you mentioned the other day too, when we talked, that you had said that sometimes it makes sense to hold it and wait until, if you're underwater on a note, to hold it and wait until the market rises again, in which case now you do have equity and you can go after that property at that time. So you might not get any payments for a period of time, but you see the market rising and then you're putting yourself into a stronger position to be able to take that note back.
So who here invests in notes? Anybody here? Okay, just to get a gauge. So, Josh, could you talk a little bit about some of the workouts you've seen or some of the work you do when you're dealing with homeowners and lenders on that side?
Yeah, and I'm going to be more the doom and gloom. I know Gerald's telling me all the good stories about it, and there are a lot of good stories. I don't want to discourage anybody from note investing. I think it's a great avenue.
You see him when it goes back.
But I see the worst, fortunately or unfortunately. But a lot of these borrowers are looking for workouts. So some of them will strategically default. Well, they'll just stop making payments because their loan's been sold or transferred, 3, 4, 10 times, and they don't even know who their lender is. So when you give them a call and tell them you just bought the loan and why don't you make payments or what do you want to do with this, sometimes they're shocked, sometimes they don't believe you, and sometimes they're really just looking for somebody to talk to so they can get into some workout or modification. So I will see situations. I had one the other day. It was a note purchaser where the loan hadn't been paid, I think, in 9 years. And The person who purchased the loan started contacting them, trying to get them to pay. It was $150,000 second. And the minute they started contacting them, they started getting legal demands. Show me that you're the owner of the note. Show me, that you haven't passed the statute of limitations, and everything under the sun. So they sent it over to us, and take a look at it, and you start responding and actually getting the documentation together and trying to figure out whether it's a legitimate note. And you have to make sure you have everything before you are moving forward with anything. So it turns out, after I think 5 or 6 different demands from the borrower, ends up filing bankruptcy. Goes into bankruptcy, and the guy's thinking, my note's gone. You bought it for pennies on the dollar. In bankruptcy, has to provide all the information on all their finances and everything. Proposes to pay the entire $150,000 back over time. So now this guy is getting, the lender, I think he's getting $4,000 total a month on this investment that he thought was pretty much worthless. So a lot of times it's just trying to contact them, trying to figure out what they're looking for. That's a good example. There's bad examples where I had another one recently where somebody bought a second. The borrower had taken out 2 equity lines at the same time or similar times, paid off one of them, and then sued our client claiming that that was the one he paid off and that the note was actually worthless. So, there's good and bad on that. So, like Gerald said, is you can get a grab bag. There may be really good notes in there that they're going to pay you the full $150,000 back, and there may be another one where you think you have something and it's absolutely worthless. So, you have to be able to kind of roll with it, but be careful. I mean, there's a lot of regulations in place. You could buy a lawsuit. You could end up defending a lawsuit that you had no idea. All you were looking for was a quick buck, and all of a sudden you're getting sued because you're the holder of the note. So there's the good and the bad. I say I see more good in the long run on these notes, but there are bad if you're not careful. Very bad.
And that brings up a good point. Ellis, maybe you can touch on this. In those types of situations, to try to avoid those bad apples, how do you protect yourself? What is the paperwork involved, and what do you got to make sure that you're reviewing to protect yourself on these things?
Well, number one thing is if you have a ton of equity, that's always the best, because then you have at least a way out. So when Gerald's talking about buying the basket of notes, a lot of times you have to do that to mitigate the fact that there's not a lot of equity in all of them, right? But if you have a lot of equity, then it gives you plenty of ways to work it out. I think the thing I've learned through the years, especially working with Gerald, is that as you look, because we looked at so many notes, you have to kind of get a profile of who the borrower is. Are they going to be litigious? Are they, you're trying to develop this kind of psychological profile of how is this going to go, right? So the less equity there is, the more that becomes important, because then the litigation can come, and then that's when your profits start to disappear. But sometimes you just never know, right? But you just have to kind of plan for the worst.
Interesting. And on the paperwork side, what are the typical types of paperwork involved when you're buying a note that you want to be reviewing in detail?
Well, if you can get the collateral file, which shows all the servicing notes, that's really important, because that kind of gives you
the actual monthly payments that were made.
Yeah, any notes that the person has made about, is this person disgruntled, or why are they late? It gives you kind of a window into what's happening in the situation. So if you can get the collateral file, that's really important. And you also want to make sure that what you're buying, if you think it's a first or you think it's a second, it better be, because they're not guaranteeing it all the time. Right? Sometimes you get a nice surprise, right, where you buy a second and it ends up being a first, and you're like, oh wow, Christmas, right?
Yeah. Or it could go the other way, you're in third.
Or it can go another way, where I think we talked about one in Texas, right, where you think it's a first, but because it's a second, because Texas is a little bit strange in how it does certain things. So unless you know that, you're like, oh well, I got a first. No, you don't have a first, you have a second. So really understanding the customs of each state, I think, is really important. Gerald likes to buy in all these different states. You got to really know your stuff to do that. I wouldn't jump in very many states if I was just starting out. I would try to focus on maybe one or two.
One state, so you understand the laws of that state.
Yeah, and then get good legal help in that state, because if you have to go through a foreclosure, which in most cases when you're buying a non-performer, I would have to say that's almost like a given. You want to have somebody that's going to handle it for you that you can trust.
Okay. And Gerald, can you talk a little bit about the judicial and non-judicial foreclosure state issues that you run into in these different states?
Sure. California is a non-judicial state, so it's a deed of trust state as opposed to a mortgage state like Florida. The document that secures the promissory note is a mortgage. In California, the document that secures the promissory note is a deed of trust. And here in California, you can foreclose in about 4 months. It's 90 days once you file a notice of default. Then after that expires, then you file a notice of trustee sale, which is 21 days later. You can pull the trigger on the foreclosure. You can go to the courthouse steps and you can own the property at that time. Whereas Florida, it could take at least a year to foreclose, and the expense is a lot more.
Because you actually have to appear in court for a judicial foreclosure.
I've had to appear one time.
Or you file in court versus a trustee.
Right. It's like a civil suit compared to a deed of trust here in California. It's a much simpler process here in California to foreclose. Florida is more difficult, and a lot of the states like Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, they're all judicial states. And so we don't shy away from it. So Florida has been some of our best note deals ever. And so we just build it into the cost. We just figure we're going to pay a little bit less for a Florida note because it does take a lot longer to foreclose on the property and costs more. But we've had some awesome deals in Florida.
So you're just building in the cost of the attorney's fees, the additional attorney's fees, as well as the time, right? So, okay.
You just need a bigger discount when you buy in some of those judicial states. New York and New Jersey are the worst. It could take you 2 years, 3 years to foreclose in New York and New Jersey. And the cost is more.
I think because we were talking about time before, time is such an important part on investing in notes. Talk about a time from the perspective of, we were talking about trying to get the process of onboarding a note, how long it takes to get all the information. But also talk about the, for me, one of the benefits of investing in notes is when you're holding it over time, it's a lot less than holding real property, right? Because you're not having all the costs associated with holding that. So talk about some of the pros and cons of time in note investing.
Sure. When I first started buying notes, it was a scary feeling to wire off, $300,000 to some entity, some hedge fund, and they say, okay, your notes will be here in a couple of months. It's like when you do escrow, there's no escrow with a note purchase. I mean, there can be, but at the time when I first got into this, nobody was doing it. Gerald, if you want these notes, here's how it works. You wire me the money, and a month or two later, the note files will come in. And so you're just kind of begging and praying that your notes are going to show up.
But you're getting the originals and all that too, right?
Eventually.
Supposedly.
That used to drive me crazy because I remember when we started a lot of buying together, and then we're just supposed to wire this money, and I was just like, oh my god, $300,000 just like poof. Right?
I mean, in 2013, I spent $3 million on notes. Yeah. We wired off $3 million, and they were kind of hoping and praying that the files are going to show up. And then one day, these boxes show up in my office, and they're like 10 boxes. This
like,
big.
I gotta go through all this crap.
But I think what Dave is talking about is, you buy a note, and sometimes the collateral file, which is like the pay history, the original note, the original deed of trust, the assignments. The way notes are transferred, instead of a grant deed, it's an assignment or mortgage or assignment of deed of trust. So you have to get the assignments from the original lender to intermediary lender to us. Sometimes a file will show up and there's 4 or 5 assignments that have never been recorded. So that's one of the big issues we've had is an incomplete chain of title where we've had missing assignments. We have assignment from A to B and from B to C, but no assignment from C to D. And then we're D to E, so we had to track down and go to MERS or go to different entities to finally get those assignments done. But it could take you 3 or 4 or 6 months. I mean, I have a couple of notes that I bought in 2013 that I still have not received. I mean, we spent $3 million, and right now I'm still out about $35,000 worth of notes. So it's kind of a small amount, but still $35,000 is kind of a lot of money, to just. And I talked to the lender, and we're fighting about it, and I may have to get an attorney and sue him. So it's really important to buy. I'm serious.
Now Josh is everybody's best friend.
have not delivered. It's a breach of contract, you know? And so...
I have actually dealt with some of those types of suits because a lot of what they're promising, they don't always have.
Right.
The parties that are selling these notes.
They're buying it with your money.
Exactly, yeah.
You
So
know.
you're not always
I know.
getting what you pay for.
And, you know, I was talking to that particular seller of the note, and he said, well, Gerald, you made a lot of money that year, didn't you? And he's like making excuses for why, you know, what's a couple more notes, you know, I mean, just, you know, forget about it. You know? And that's the way he was. Seriously, that's the way he was, you know. So one of the things I would mention from David's conversation is be sure you know who you're buying from and that they're reputable and that they're going to deliver on time. I mean, at that same time, I bought a group of notes from one entity that happens to be in Newport Beach, California, and I bought another from the same trade. There was this company, National City Bank out of Philadelphia, was selling like 5,000 notes, and I helped purchase those notes. And so I got one set of files from one hedge fund that I dealt with, another set of files from another hedge fund that I dealt with. The guys from Philadelphia, everything came, that was those big boxes I was talking about, came like clockwork. Within 30 days, we had everything we needed. The other entity, I had a lot of fighting with them, a lot of discussions and negotiations, and you know, the notes that I originally bought didn't come through.
That's
So
after
said,
they have your money.
We're going to get, yeah, I'd already given them the money. So they said, well, Gerald, I'm sorry, those notes didn't come through. We're going to give you these notes instead. I'm serious, you know? And they were nowhere near the same quality of notes. It's like it's like a bait and switch, you know? You bought these, but...
Yeah, and a lot of the agreements that they have for these purchases, they have clauses in there where they can give you replacement notes. And so the value of those is...
Well, it's
difficult
supposed to be equal or
Exactly.
like kind value,
It's
but
subjective.
it isn't.
And why that's
always.
important is you can't enforce your loan until you have those documents. You can't go and file foreclosure. You can't ask for
Right.
performance until you have those documents.
We couldn't even start collection on those loans,
Yeah,
you know?
it's a problem.
Until we had all the chain of title and everything squared.
And what you may value in a note may be different than what he values in a note, right? So there is a bit of a subjective term. They think they're giving you what they call like value, but you may say, but that's not like for what I thought was important.
Yeah.
And that's part of the battle that you get.
So it's frustrating. I mean,
So talk about the other side of time. So obviously the time of getting the notes is a big part of it, but over time, talk about some of the advantages of owning notes versus owning real property.
you know, you get a massive cash flow off of notes. I mean, I have notes that I bought for $10,000 that I'm getting $400 a month in for 20 years. So, you know, it's hard to buy a rental property and get $400 a month of net cash flow off that rental property. So you can get, the thing is with a note though, it's a depreciating asset. So, you know, you may start off with a $100,000 balance, but every month that balance goes down and down and down. So over time, you know, your balance, your loan balance goes like that. Whereas with a home, it goes up over time, hopefully. Equity builds and appreciation of the property. You know, I love notes. I have a balanced portfolio. I hold some rentals and I hold a lot of notes. So I'm trying to balance out my notes and my appreciating assets with my depreciating assets. But the thing about notes is, you know, you don't have to go out there and manage contractors. You know, they talk about no tenants, toilets, and termites. But I like the cash flow off of notes, and then we have some lump sums of cash that come in too. You know, when you buy a note, you never know what the outcome's going to be. You could end up with, you know, $400 a month for 20 years, or you could end up owning the property, or you could get a cash payoff on that note. You know, they might go borrow some money from their family members and just pay you off completely. Usually it's a short payoff. You know, you might have bought the note for $20,000 and they owed you $80,000 and you accepted, you know, $50,000. So you took a $30,000 discount. We just had a note, I hate to even mention this, but I foreclosed on a property in Irvine. It was a third mortgage. It was a $2.5 million house. And we just got paid off $342,000 on this deal. It was a flip. We ended up owning the property as a result of foreclosing on a third mortgage. So I paid $35,000 for this third mortgage about a year ago. She made payments for a few months, $600 a month. And then she quit paying, and she also quit paying her first mortgage. So we decided to foreclose on the property. We foreclosed on it, we got possession of the house, We paid her $25,000 cash for keys to move out because I wanted the house empty so I could do what I needed to do, renovate it, put it on the market, and sell it. And we just closed escrow last Monday, and the house sold for $2.55 million. We had about $90,000 invested in it, and we got a check for $340. So that was it was a flip basically. But the way we started it, the way we did it, was by owning a note.
One thing I think that, Gerald, you should probably talk about this too, is that one of the myths of the note business is that you think you can always get the property. You don't always have that, right? Just because you own the note doesn't mean you can get the property. It's definitely a possible exit, but you don't have control over that.
You gotta be happy either way.
You have to be happy either way.
You can't count on it. You have to be flexible. You're either going to get cash flow. I have a property I foreclosed on in Garden Grove, and the people that lived in the house and owned it put up so much of a stink, I ended up selling the house back to them for I think I had about $30,000 invested in it, and I paid them $75. They paid me $75 to just deed the house back because the first mortgage was still in place on that. I had a second. I foreclosed on it, so the first is still sitting on that property. And these were some elderly people, and one of the people lived in the house was handicapped, and they were going to create a website. We hate the Lemoyne Group. That's what they came to my office. They had their cell phones, they had video cameras. My office happens to be in Garden Grove also. So they're like, this is Gerald Lemoyne, and he's the culprit that foreclosed on these poor helpless people. That's brutal. So I said, you know what? It's not worth the battle. I made a profit on it, but I just said, it's not worth the fight.
So Gerald, on your Irvine property, did you have to service the first and second at the same time while you were doing the rehab?
Normally I would do that, but I did not. This lady, by the time I finished my foreclosure, she was a year behind on the first mortgage, and it was $170,000 to bring it current. So the second was non-performing and hadn't been performing in years. She hadn't made a payment on that in 7 or 8 years. They actually started foreclosure in the middle of January. The first mortgage finally got around to filing foreclosure, and the house was already on the market. We had offers on it, so I knew that we were going to sell the property. So I didn't bother to bring it current, but I could have,
And did you have to pay default interest on the first when you paid it off?
No, it was the interest rate was low. It was like 3.5%. I had to pay some late charges and some penalties, some legal costs, but it was not that significant, really.
There was a note that was really interesting that somebody I know brought to me where they had borrowed money in a second position on their residence to go invest it with somebody, and that person basically stole their money. It was like a $100,000, $150,000 note, and they came to me because this guy is trying to talk to us and foreclose. I don't know what to do. I'm scared and stuff like that. And I guess they were dodging him for 3 months or so or longer. And the guy was about to foreclose, and I look at the paperwork and it says the Lemoyne Group on it. You guys are in luck right now. So I called Gerald, and we were able to get it taken care of for him, and it was really just hilarious. And I'm like,
Small world.
You're not going to believe this, Gerald. The guy that's been dodging you for 3-4 months, you're about to foreclose on, they're sitting in my office. So it was pretty hilarious. But yeah, the things that you do that you can find sometimes in a small world. Talking about some of the paperwork issues and things like that, and not having all those paperwork. Josh, can you talk about what was happening with the whole MERS issue and what was happening previously where they weren't able to foreclose on properties and stuff like that? What happened, with some of the big banks?
Yeah, so what would happen, because these loans were bought and sold so often, is they used to have a structure which was MERS, which would hold the real estate. So you could transfer it to different entities through this one corporation, which was MERS. So as far as the foreclosures would go, is you didn't know who actually had the ability to foreclose at the time. So, people would foreclose in the name of MERS, who actually had who was listed as the party on the deed of trust, and there was lawsuits filed saying you didn't actually have the right to foreclose because you're not the proper holder. And a lot of times they weren't the proper holder because it was transferred so many times. Now the next big wave is whether it's in a particular trust or not, whether the property is actually held in that trust and who has the ability to foreclose when it is in a trust. So there's all these different avenues because of this whole business of transferring loans, in bulk, and the whole crisis to begin with, that it wasn't necessarily done properly. There was these shortcuts that were done, like MERS, that was kind of a holding entity.
Does everybody know what MERS is?
No.
So they would transfer title or assignments digitally. They didn't have a physical document at the recorder's office to say this loan goes from ABC company to Lemoyne Group. They would do it all digitally, and nobody.
So was MERS a real entity?
It's a real entity, but there was no transparency as far as where things were transferred. So it was kind of
they kept track of everything. So you could call MERS to figure out who had the actual title to the
But
property.
the biggest problem was that they didn't have the original paperwork, right? So then they couldn't foreclose then in that case.
Exactly. So and it's not only that, but then the party who is actually foreclosing, a lot of times they didn't have the actual note. So the documentation is extremely important to know what you're buying. I mean, you may be buying something and it may still be in the process of transferring, like Gerald said. He's got one from 2000 or a handful from 2013 that he hasn't received yet. So the way this was done, especially during the mortgage crisis, was not the most, or was efficient. It was not the best way to actually transfer notes and property, and it got a lot of people in trouble, as everybody saw during the whole crisis.
Wow. How has it changed since then?
It's a lot more regulated. I'd say the CFPB has changed a lot, which is a whole nother topic.
Can you explain what they do? Besides stealing people's money?
The whole idea is that they were set up to regulate the financial institutions. There's a question, there's a case right now that's pending as to whether it's constitutional, because there is one person who's responsible for the entire CFPB who cannot be fired even by the president except for cause. So they have a lot of power. They provide fines to the Wells Fargo scandal relating to the incentive program that they had. So the CFPB fined them $100 million for that program. So the idea is they're a watchdog. They're a consumer watchdog to look out for the little guy. And they were instituted after the whole crisis in order to avoid this type of problem with the transfer of loans and inability to talk to your lender and everything else that was happening when everything crashed. So they will regulate they're set up to regulate the big guys, but you are subject, if it's a federally related loan, you're subject to CFPB regulations. Your servicer is going to be subject to CFPB regulations. So if you're not keeping track of what you're supposed to do, say Gerald buys a bunch of loans and they're being serviced. I don't know if you service your own loans or you have
We service some, but in some states we don't service our own.
Okay, so you will hire companies called servicers who will either accept payments for you, foreclose for you. They will do the legwork on trying to collect on the loan or foreclose on the property. Now those servicers are subject to CFPB regulations, and if they're not following them, you're the one who's going to suffer in the long run. So there's regulations relating to foreclosure, loan modification, and workout requirements. So you may have a requirement to actually work with your borrower in certain situations. You may have a requirement to do certain things before you can even start the foreclosure process in certain situations. So the CFPB is really set up to enforce these federal regulations. And they're pretty onerous. They're changing again in October 2017 as far as the servicing rules. And there's some other additions in April 2018, which they're trying to fix up some of the errors that they had previously. But the idea is to regulate these big banks, and you are generally going to be under them even if you're buying a pool of loans and start using a small servicer. You're still going to be under a lot of these regulations.
So how do you make sure that you're in compliance? You hire a servicer that knows what they're doing to do all these things, or an attorney if you're servicing yourself to make sure if you're working things out to make sure that you're in compliance?
Yeah, I mean the servicer you choose is important if you're using a servicer to do your foreclosure or collection work, because they're going to have to be in compliance with these regulations. And if you just hire a mom and pop servicer that really doesn't know what they're doing, it's going to be problematic.
And it's not just one state. It's being compliant and being registered in every single state they're going to be servicing, right? So they may have 50 different licenses they have to hold if they're going to work nationwide.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, the CFPB regulations, those are federal, so those are going to apply no matter what state you're in. But every state has their own regulations. For instance, I mean, California has foreclosure loan modification workout requirements, but only for first trust deeds. Other states have them for regardless of whether it's a first or second. Other states have mediation programs, which before you can even start foreclosure, you have to enter into a mediation program with your borrower to try and work it out and see if there's any potential options to avoid foreclosure. So if you just buy a note, say in Nevada, and you don't understand or know about their mediation program, then you're going to end up getting sued. So yeah, you have to get a servicer in the state that you're buying the note in and make sure they understand the laws, not only federal regulations, but the specific state regulations. It's different everywhere.
And you're primarily talking about homeowner-based loans versus investor loans or commercial-type loans, right? Is that where they kind of step in?
Yeah, there's definitely more regulations based on owner-occupied residential. So there are regulations on commercial as well, including the RESPA and CFPB regulations as well. Some of those do apply to 1 through 4s or income property, not just owner-occupied. So you have to know. I mean, it is different again in every state. You have to understand the federal regulations, but it's a minefield if you don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, where are the best places to go and look for resources state by state? For someone like you, Gerald, who's working across all these states, I'm sure you have an attorney who looks at this stuff, but where do you go to look for yourself to verify?
Honestly, I haven't. I'm kind of a dive in and let's see what happens. I'm about the opposite of what Josh is recommending.
That's why I love people like that.
I see a big legal bill coming.
I'm kind of a fly by the seat of my pants type guy, but you can go to different regulations. The state, you can Google the state, like the Department of Real Estate, and you can start reading the rules on that. For example, Wisconsin, I had no idea that I could not, I own like 2 loans in Wisconsin. And one of the borrowers complained to the State Department of Real Estate that I was not treating him fairly and this stuff. So I get this letter from the Wisconsin Department of Real Estate. And it turns out that even though I own this loan, no other parties involved in it, I cannot collect payments on that loan. I cannot even accept payments. I have to go through a licensed servicer. And there's not many states like that. Luckily.
Georgia.
Huh?
Georgia's like that.
Well, Georgia's not even that way. It's different. You're not supposed to own a loan in Georgia unless you're a Georgia business. So if you want to own loans in Georgia, you almost have to set up like an LLC or something in Georgia. And we own a handful of loans in Georgia, and so far, knock on wood, we haven't gotten in trouble with Georgia. But those kind of peculiarities in those states that, Wisconsin surprised me. That I can't even own the loan in Wisconsin and collect the payments on my own. I have to go through a licensed servicer.
Your philosophy, though, is kind of just do a bunch of stuff and hopefully no problems happen. You'll figure it out as you go.
That's what I've done for 10 years. For 10 years now.
Well, and I think it's also like Gerald's been doing this long enough to where he has resources and a knowledge base to pull from that even if he gets in a situation, he may not understand that state, but he understands how to work out debt, right? So he can play off of that.
Yeah.
If you're new at this, you should probably work with a servicing company, right? His strategy might not be the best for you because you don't have the knowledge base and you don't have the history and the wisdom necessarily to sort through some of these problems. So I think it's an important distinction.
For me, I stick to like maybe 1 or 2 states and then I call it good.
Right.
Plenty of opportunity.
It's too late for me now.
Yeah.
Gerald's a junkie. It's different. He's got a different set of criteria.
And I'd say even more than just the 1 or 2 states, if you're new at this, stick to the areas you know. Even in California, stick to the areas you know. I mean, there's so many different areas just in California that are just their own little worlds. I mean, if you go to bankruptcy court up in Santa Rosa and you have no idea, and you don't know the judge or the attorneys there,
That's huge.
It's gonna be a problem. So if you're thinking of buying a few notes and they're way up in Eureka and you don't know Eureka real estate or what goes on in that area, you may want to talk to somebody local or think twice about doing it.
Let me throw in one along those lines. We have a note in El Monte, just the city of El Monte out here.
Is that ours? Our note?
I don't think so.
No, okay.
No. No, that was Ibrahim.
Oh, yeah.
That was
I'll see his name.
That was.
Sorry. Find that out.
Sorry. But anyhow, and so we started foreclosure on a property in El Monte, and then we get this letter in the mail, this bill for like $2,500. It turns out you're supposed to register with the city of El Monte and get a license or a permit to start foreclosure before you even initiate foreclosure.
Ridiculous.
It's like, and I didn't know that. And there's a handful of states in LA County, cities in LA County and Orange County where you have to actually get a permit or like a license or something before you even start foreclosure. So that's on our checklist now. That wasn't there before. And then recently, I bought a pool of notes in September, and it was like 60-something notes. I paid like $500,000 for $5 million of unpaid balance of debt. So I paid like 10 cents on the dollar. And some of those loans, one loan I paid $175 for it. And so, it's in Elizabeth, New Jersey. It was a junk loan that I say, well, when I price out a pool of loans, I go down the spreadsheet and I plug in a dollar amount for each loan that totals out to my purchase price. Some loans are $150, some loans are $50,000. And I got a letter from the Elizabeth, New Jersey, that they want me to pay them $6,500 for failing to register as a foreclosing entity. So we'll see what happens on that. I don't know how they're going to come to California and collect money from me. If I was in Elizabeth, New Jersey, it'd be a different issue.
Right.
We'll see. I don't know.
So let's talk about purchasing notes. And Alice, I'm going to give you this question first. One of the questions we always get is, why do banks sell these notes in the first place? So talk a little bit about that, and then let's talk about where you find notes and how other people can find notes.
Okay, so on the institutional side, I think Gerald is probably well versed in this because he's seen a lot more institutional notes than I have. He's really become quite an expert in that area. But originally, when I was buying a lot of institutional notes, why they would sell them is, like, especially the small balance notes. If you think about it, what is the cost of servicing a $30,000 second or a $500,000 first, right? It's about the same. So it doesn't really make sense for them to carry a lot of this smaller balance loans. And plus, a lot of times, and it was great for us, is when a bank would take over another bank, right? So the stronger bank would get all this junk from this other bank that they took over. Remember when banks were failing every week? Mm-hmm. So then they would just say, okay, we don't want this stuff anymore, and they didn't really have time to do a lot of due diligence, and we would get a lot of home runs out of that. So why they're doing it is because they're just trying to clean up their portfolio and cost benefit analysis for them. And when they make mistakes, if you're smart, you can really do well. One of the myths back then was that you could buy defaulted notes from banks that were in trouble. But it was actually the opposite, because if they were to sell those notes and mark them down, that would definitely put them into receivership. Right? So they would kind of hang on for dear life. So what really took was the stronger bank to come along, take the junk paper, and then get rid of it.
Mm-hmm. How do you find it?
How do I find the notes?
How do you find notes?
So on the institutional side, it has a lot to do with networking. You have to kind of make the right contacts. I mean, Gerald and I spent a lot of time meeting people. We spent a lot of money just circulating the right crowds to kind of get access to notes. It was easier back then because there weren't a lot of people doing it, right? My favorite is going after the private notes, because then I just look up in the county recorder's office for private notes, and then I got plenty of prospects to go after. Mm-hmm. It's a little more intensive because you're kind of doing one at a time versus buying pools of 50, 60, 100 notes. But I found that, and I had this conversation earlier, is that when it comes to, you know, like if you're going to go to battle with somebody, you want to have an advantage. If I'm going to battle with an asset manager, they're really good at what they do. That's why they're there. So it's really, you know, it's a lot of headbutting, right? And then you have also more competition. When I'm dealing with a private individual, I'm kind of going, you know, person to person. Hey, what's going on? You know, why is this note a problem for you? You know, what do you like? One woman I'm buying a note from her. Well, I inherited this house. I sold it to a friend of ours, and I can't foreclose on it. It just be. I'm like, oh, I'm happy to do that. Right here, have some money. I got no issue with that at all. So yeah. So how do you find notes? If you're gonna jump into pools, you really got to network with the people that are in that space. Hedge funds, small banks. The bigger banks are going to be really tough to kind of penetrate because they have the relationships. And then on the smaller side, like what I do is I go after the individual notes.
So what you're doing is you're actually going on different data sites to find lists of the private notes versus the bank notes.
Exactly.
And getting their contact information and trying to call them over and over again, basically having a call system set up to be able to see who's interested in selling and that type of thing. Then
That's pretty much it.
Do you do that yourself, or do you have VAs to do that for you?
I have VAs that do a lot of the initial screening, and then we do direct mail campaigns. Yes.
Okay, interesting. And do any of you guys deal with a performing paper, where you can buy the performing paper from people?
Yeah.
And how does that situation look? A lot of the same type of situation where they just they have a different pain point, I'm assuming, than not getting payments.
Yeah, usually it's like a liquidity issue. Like, hey, I've got this note, I'd rather have cash than payments.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little different conversation. There's not as much pain. It's more about what do they need money for.
Okay.
I also buy partial notes. So if one person has 241 payments left in their note, I'm going to buy the first 60 payments from them, because they just need a little bit of money, but they don't want to sell the whole note. I'm like, I don't want the whole note. I'll just take what you need.
Okay, so you can buy like 5 years of payments and get a great rate of return on your money by doing that strategy.
And less risk.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gerald, talk about on the institutional side, 'cause I know you do like to buy that. And you mentioned before the A to B to C to D to E. Explain how that process works, like the life of the note before it ends up on your plate.
Well, a lot of these notes, like someone mentioned earlier, they haven't had a payment since 2009 or 2007, or when the whole meltdown happened, 2008. People just their equity went away. They had no equity in their house. They're like, I don't care if I keep this house or not. So they just quit making payments on their second mortgage and in their first in some cases. But and as far as the chain of title, like the A to B, B to C, it's just something that you have to record all those assignments. You have to make sure you have the complete chain of title, and they also have to be recorded in the correct order.
Proper sequence.
The proper sequence. So you can't, if the note was owned by this bank from 2007 to 2009, then they sold it to this other bank and they owned it for 2 years, you can't record this assignment back here. You have to get them all recorded in the correct order. I've mailed in 3 or 4 assignments before, and I put a yellow sticky on each one. Record this one first, record this one second, record this one third. To make sure it gets done right.
And sometimes the bank is out of it, right? They've gone belly up, and then you have to find out, okay, who took over this bank, who can sign for them.
Right.
It can get pretty scary.
As far as finding notes, the notes that I'm buying right now are coming from hedge funds that are reaching the end of their cycle. Like David mentioned, they had done a PPM for like 2 years. Some of these hedge funds have done a PPM, or private placement memorandum. So they have a private offering for 5 years, say. And they're in the 4.5 years into that 5 years. So they basically need to liquidate their assets and pay off their investors. And I just turned in pricing on 2 different tapes this week, last week and this week, for about $800,000. And all those notes are a mixture of performing and non-performing. And some of these loans, they call them performing, but maybe they've had 7 out of 12 payments come in. To me, I call them semi-performing. They're not necessarily the cleanest paper. They're not A+ paper. They're B or C paper. But at least they're making payments. So if you can buy them cheap enough, you can do okay. And then one of the other notes was a community bank in New York. And this is a $900,000 second mortgage. The first mortgage is like $1 million, or no, less than that, 800,000. The second mortgage is 900,000, and the house is worth $2.5 million, and it's cross-collateralized to another property that he owns. So there's quite a bit of assets there, and it's a performing note, but it's underperforming. So he's paying. The note was supposed to be like a 5-year note, and it would convert to fully amortizing after 5 years. But now they're 6 years into it, and the bank extended the terms of that note to where it's interest only right now for another year. They added on a year of interest only type payments. So if we buy that note, we're going to probably force this guy to come up with a bigger chunk of money. Right now he's paying about $3,500 a month on this note, and we need to get $6,000 or $7,000 to make it profitable for us.
Josh, do you deal with people that come to you that have problems with notes that they're tired of and they want to sell on that side?
Yeah, for various reasons. I mean, even performing notes where you got a situation where the person who bought it thought they were actually going to get the property back, and they were looking at it more from an investment standpoint of getting the property, flipping it, and lo and behold, the borrower starts paying, so they don't want a performing note. So it depends what you're looking for. There are a lot of lenders that are looking to unload those types of notes, as just as much as there are the really bad notes that haven't been performing in years.
So for those guys in the room that didn't understand that means email him every week for notes.
I get those questions a lot. Like, do you have the connection to these notes? Well, I don't necessarily have the connection to it. I do see it a lot more in the bankruptcy aspect, where I see that there's a bad situation. Maybe they're stuck in a Chapter 13 reorganization where the borrower is paying every month, but they don't want to deal with the whole bankruptcy aspect of it, so they're looking to unload it. So it's not very common, but you do get situations like that, or situations where the borrower's trying to sell in the bankruptcy and they're looking for buyers, and so you may be interested in that aspect. So that's what
You mentioned bankruptcy a few times. What does that typically mean for a note? Could it go sour or it could work out?
That's a great question. It can mean a lot of different things.
Sometimes good, sometimes bad.
Yes, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And it means that one thing, to go back to looking at the types of notes you're purchasing, is you can look to see if any of these borrowers are filing bankruptcy or have filed bankruptcy in the past. It's all public record. All you need is the Social Security number, which likely you're going to get with the tape. Or you can even look it up by name. But it's either going to mean that they are trying to reorganize and pay the debt back, which does happen a decent amount of times. They're filing a Chapter 13 or a Chapter 11, which is a reorganization. They're going to be most likely trying to pay the debt back. It can also mean that they're trying to remove the lien altogether and pay you nothing. And just to generalize it, if in a Chapter 13 scenario, even if it's the borrower's principal residence, the seconds can be worth a lot of money in some situations, but in a Chapter 13, if there's no equity supporting your lien as a second, they can strip it off completely and pay you nothing. So your $100,000 loan that you thought you were getting and you bought for $10,000, it could be worth $0 if you can't prove to the court that there's actually at least $1 supporting your lien. So it can mean a lot of different things. Bankruptcy is a whole nother world. If you see a bunch of loans at a discount because they're in bankruptcy, it's not necessarily the worst thing, but you need to do your research on it. What I've done for a lot of clients is I'll review these tapes just for bankruptcy issues across the country to try and figure out, okay, what is the actual effect of this bankruptcy? They may have confirmed a plan 5 years ago, and they're wondering whether they're actually going to get ongoing payments or their lien was stripped off altogether. In some situations, we've been pleasantly surprised where they bought a loan where the investors unloaded it because they thought it was worth nothing and it's being paid. They modified it, but they're still getting a couple $100,000 back through a plan. Other situations, I've had clients who have bought loans that they thought were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that were literally $0, just stripped completely, worth absolutely nothing, with no recourse whatsoever.
So a little different question. You guys both mentioned that notes are a lot more popular now. I'm curious, looking back like 10 years, 20 years, how does the popularity change based on where the economy is? And do you think it's going to keep being a really popular option if we take a dip again in the future?
Well, I think when Ellis and I started buying notes like 2010, especially the seconds, we were paying a nice tape of loans might be 12 cents on the dollar. Nowadays, it's probably closer to 20 or 25 cents on the dollar, because so many people have jumped into that business, just like a meeting, like a class we're having tonight, or a meeting we're having tonight. We've raised the interest level. A lot of people had never even thought about investing in notes, and now with people educating, the Scott Carsons and Eddie Speed, and there's just so many people out there that they're teaching this on a big scale, that it's gained more popularity. So the demand and the supply and demand issue has raised it up. I think that over the long run, I'm in it for the long run, and people say, like, the interest rate's going up, is that going to have any effect on you? Not really. If I'm buying notes for 15 cents on the dollar or 25 cents on the dollar, whether the interest rate's 4% or 4.5% or 5%, it's really a negligible effect on it for me. The rising equity has helped us a lot. I had a loan that I bought over here in West LA. I paid like $20,000 for it, and we just collected $220,000 on it. When I bought it, the property was negative equity or break even, and since then it went from being worth $600,000 to $900,000, and our note became fully covered. It was total equity over the first mortgage to cover our note. So they went through a standard sale. We had to put them into foreclosure to really to force them to do something with us. And so they did a standard sale. We got every penny that was owed to us. But if we had tried to do that earlier, like 2 or 3 years ago, the equity was not there, and we might have gotten $40,000 or $50,000 instead of $200,000. But just the rising home values really helped us a lot.
I don't know that we necessarily peaked interest here. We might have just scared everybody off. Right? Talk and everything. So let's switch gears just really quick, and just because we've been talking a lot about the non-performing paper and the problems that go along with that. And I know a lot of people in the room, they lend money, on flips. They will go through seller financing on a deal, and it's a little bit different of a situation. Have you done that before, Ellis? And what are the pros and cons, or some of the headaches that go along with that type of lending?
What I really like, not only buying and selling, so I like creating notes.
Okay.
But I don't really do kind of your typical hard money fix and flip type of stuff.
Okay.
I do. I try to find niches where there's not a lot of people doing it, because like if you went into a typical real estate meeting like this, you're going to always find hard money lenders there, because there's a lot of people that can say, hey, I'll lend you money for a year or whatever, and I've seen the yield for that get really compressed. And
as margins got compressed.
Right. Yeah, because where else are you going to get those yields? So I tend to do much more specialized lending, and I love it. And what actually, not to sidetrack a little, but what caught my eye is you guys are doing a meetup on investing in real estate for your kids. So I created some notes where, does everybody know what an equity participation note is? Okay, so an equity participation note means that you're not only just getting interest, but you're also getting a piece of the action when the property is sold. Right? So right now my kids don't need cash flow because they're living off of me, right? But when they go to college, they could really use a nice, bump in their portfolio, right? So I lent, I built up their IRA accounts over time so that I lent money where there's no payments due, right? But I get a piece of the action when that property is sold. And guess what's happening now is like, some of the guys are flipping, we've held these things for like 4 or 5 years, and then I'm like, oh wow, I just paid for my first year of my kid's college. Wow, that's awesome, right? Because there's a lot of advantages for say a buy and holder, because what if he doesn't have to make monthly payments? How many more deals can he do, right? And if I don't know how many other people are offering that, but I think I'm one of the few people that are doing that for people.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I love creating notes.
So you'll create it for homeowners or create it for other investors?
I usually do it for investors because, on your list of questions, you talked about Dodd-Frank. I don't like dealing with those issues.
Actually, could you talk about that, Josh? I know that's a big thing, dealing with owner-occupied versus non-owner-occupied, and the different rules for those different kinds of notes.
As far as regulation-wise, there's a lot more regulations, just to put it simply, as far as if for owner-occupied loans. The whole idea is to protect the borrower, to try and keep them in their home. So, for example, California has a pre-foreclosure requirement, the homeowner bill of rights it's called, where there is a whole list of items you need to check off before you can even start your foreclosure process. And you're supposed to meet with the borrower, discuss options to avoid foreclosure, call them a certain amount of times, send them letters. So there's much more stringent requirements for owner-occupied loans, again, for the purpose of trying to keep these borrowers in their home. A commercial loan or non-owner-occupied loan, there's a lot more leniency as far as how you're going to set up the loan, how you can enforce it, default interest, prepayment penalties, other items that you can't necessarily include in a standard owner-occupied 1 through 4. So Dodd-Frank is, a lot of lenders and note purchasers are trying to stay out of the umbrella of Dodd-Frank and stay with the commercial assets, and that's one way to go. There are problems with both. There's regulations that do affect you whether you're commercial or consumer, but there's definitely more protections, especially over the last 10 years or so, to protect the owner-occupied borrower and to protect their equity.
Gerald, can you talk about a creative deal that you did when you created your own paper?
I don't create paper myself, but I can talk about that one deal like I mentioned in Tustin, where I bought a performing note in Solano Beach, or Del Mar, actually, down by Carlsbad. And it was a $313,000 note that we paid, I think we paid $175 for it. So the payments were like $31.30 a month. And I found someone that was okay with getting 10% in their IRA, and I sold half of the note to them. So they're getting $1,300 a month. And so $3,100 minus $1,300 is like $1,800 a month. So we had bought the note. I think I have $80,000 invested in it. So I'm paying my partner, the person that I sold part of the note. It's a partial. You can slice a note in a couple different ways. You can, like Ellis mentioned, buying the front end of the note, the first 60 payments of, say, a 180 payment note. What I did is I had this payment of $31.30 a month coming in, so I sliced it this way, and I gave the investor $1,300 a month, and I'm keeping $1,800 a month. So the way I bought the note was I bought it at a discount. The face rate was 12%, but because I paid like $250, I think it was, or $275. No, around maybe $225, $240. I think it was $240 for a $313,000 note. So the person gave me the buyer that bought the partial gave me $160,000. I paid out $240, so I have $80,000 invested, but I'm collecting $1,800 a month on my $80,000 investment. So my yield is like 30%. So I used the partial to increase my yield. I sold off half of the note, got 2/3 of my money back. And so my investment in the note is much lower. But that's the kind of a creative deal I've done, just like a month ago is when I did this. We're using a partial to supercharge the yield on the note. And then when this note pays off, it's a 5-year balloon note. So we have 5 years of interest-only payments. So in 5 years, this guy has to pay us off the full $313,000. So I'll pay off the investor $160,000, and I'll keep $153,000 when this note pays off in 5 years.
That's what's really cool is when you can get creative out of these notes, you can really start to substantially make a lot of money, and you start to do the math associated with it. It makes a lot of sense. I really like doing wraparound mortgages where I'll buy a property with seller financing and then go resell it with seller financing as well. And a lot of times I can be in it for nothing or a very low amount of money, and I'm getting a monthly payment for almost nothing. Or I'll go through and I'll do seller financing and I'll sell a partial off where I take out all of my money out of that and still leave my equity, because I might go sell a house that I'm into for $100,000, and I might go sell it for $140,000 or $130,000,
and then I'll require $20,000 down or something like that, and then I go sell $90,000 of the note, and I hypothecate the note. What I'm doing is I'm borrowing the funds and securing it by my note, and then being able to use my note as collateral for that note, and then going through and making the difference and getting the difference in payments. And usually when I'm borrowing the money, it's at a lower rate than what I'm lending at, and so I'm making the spread on the entire thing. And so when you look at the math and start to do the mathematics there, you can really start to kill it on your rate of return.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah, if you understand how it works. Like when he's saying he's buying or selling, or buying the first 60 months of payments, he might be able to go and work himself a 20% return, just saying this guy needs 60 grand. Okay, I want your full monthly payment for the first 6 years, and you can keep the rest. And he might be making a 20% return on his money from doing that in a much safer position, because he might be in first position to get paid first over something else. And I really like the strategy of the shared appreciation loans. That's amazing.
Yeah.
There's some great strategies to utilize.
Gerald, question for you on due diligence, because we started talking about it. Josh was talking about some clients will hire him just on the bankruptcy aspects of it. Talk about when you do get a tape, what's your process for how you're evaluating the tape? What do you look at? And then how do you go through and assign a dollar amount to it before you figure out your price?
Sure. The main things we're looking for is, you're talking about buying seconds primarily, is we're looking for a performing first mortgage. If the first mortgage is delinquent or in foreclosure, it drastically changes the value of the note. But if it's a performing first mortgage, they're current, they've made the last 6 years of payments consistently in a row, and if there's equity, then that note, suppose the house is worth $500,000 and the first mortgage is $300,000, and I'm buying a $150,000 second mortgage. So that second is fully covered, is how we call it.
If the house is worth $500,000, how do you validate that if it's somewhere in New Jersey?
Well, we use AVMs primarily, and if it's an expensive note, if I'm paying say $50,000 for a single note, then I'll call up a local realtor and have them go by and value the property. I might even pay them for a BPO, broker price opinion. It's better to spend $50 or $75 up front, even though you might not buy the note, and know what the real value is, especially in an area like Brooklyn or some of the boroughs of New York. Mm-hmm. We bought a house in New Jersey, or a note on a property in New Jersey, and houses on this side of the street were worth a lot more than houses on the other side of the street because of the school district. It was a totally different school district. Mm-hmm. And we blew it kind of on that. We valued it incorrectly, thinking this house is across the street, it's got to be worth just as much, and it wasn't. So we ended up having to do an alternate method of collecting on that one. But when I look at a tape, is there equity in the property? Is the first performing? And then we look at credit reports. If I'm buying a note on a property and the guy's got a 750 FICO and he pays all his bills on time, that's like golden. It's like hitting the gold mine. Whereas if he's got a 450 FICO and everything's in collection, and his car just got repossessed, and how are you gonna get money out of that guy? So we look at credit reports. We Google everything. I've Googled properties before and find out some police report that there's a meth lab in the property and they had just done a raid on the house, and so you want to make sure you don't get into a high crime area. Some of our mentors like Gary Johnson and Clyde Wilson talk about happy notes. Happy if they pay and happy if they don't. One of my rules of thumb is never buy a note on a property that I wouldn't mind owning the property at some point in the future. If it's a junky house in the ghetto of Newark, New Jersey, unless I buy that note for pennies, very low price, I don't want the note. Due diligence, what else? We Google. For me, I look at it like I'm a private detective, like I'm a sleuth, and I want to find out as much as I can about the borrower, the homeowner, the property, the neighborhood. We use a website called City Data, which gives median incomes, crime rates, a lot of information on the neighborhood. I bought a note in St. Louis, Missouri, that I kind of screwed up on it. I paid a little bit too much for it. And I Googled it after the fact, and the median income was like $20,000 a year. So I was like, oops, it's like a ghetto. It's just a poor area of St. Louis. So I mean, we got it performing. We're getting $300 a month in on that note, but I was more flexible. I was willing to work with the homeowner more because it was such a bad area. And if they want to keep that house and live in it and pay me a few $100 a month, great, I'll take it.
Yeah.
How do you buy it as a pool of notes, and you buy selective California only or certain areas? How does it work? Can you be selective?
When I was buying pools, it was kind of like all or none. It's like, here's the pool.
Right.
Sometimes you would have some flexibility if you had a relationship and say, hey, these are the ones I want. Can we work out something with just these? And then you negotiate for, well, if you're going to take that, you got to take some of the winners with some of the dogs. And that's why I liked individual notes. It's that note. I can do my due diligence. Not a whole lot of surprises usually. I have to say I've got a pretty darn good track record with individual notes with pools. Just like this one that Gerald talked about. Like the worst note I ever had was like out of state, right? And bought it in a pool, but hey, it's just part. When you buy enough notes, there's going to be a few that are.
You're just dealing with, it's a different strategy basically. What you're happening when you're buying the individuals is you're hoping that note performs. When you're buying the pool, a certain percentage is going to not pay, a certain percentage is going to go bankrupt, a certain percentage is going to pay off right away. You did that, I think, with your pool, and I guess one of the biggest strategies that you were talking about was, a third of these things are, could possibly just pay off, which really reduces your initial capital, in that deal. For the one, and assume a third of them are gone, you're not going to be able to collect, and a third pay off, and a third get reperforming, and so your capital that comes back from the payoff ones, because you buy at such a big discount, can really be minimal for the performing ones, and really make a huge return.
And sometimes even when you do due diligence, the note that you don't think is going to be the one that performs is the one that turns around, and you're in a bad neighborhood in St. Louis, and all of a sudden you've got a winner. And the note that you think is the screaming home run deal that you pay a lot of money for, something happens financially in their life. Like if their situation changes, then obviously the quality of the note goes down drastically, and that can work for you and against you.
And I think there's only so much you can kind of glean from the information you have. I mean, there's a lot of time I've seen situations where you think you know everything about the borrower. They haven't filed bankruptcy. They haven't dealt with any litigation. They have good credit report and everything. And then you find out that there's litigation, between the HOA and a third party that's affecting the property, or the whole community is there's something wrong with it. So you can't necessarily find out everything in that. A lot of times there's issues with their own entities that they own, and you can't just necessarily get it from their social security number or the information you have on the tape. So.
And with the tape too, there's like a definite time frame. It was like, bids are due on this day, and I remember there was a time when we kept bidding on stuff, and then we wouldn't buy. You spend the money for due diligence, and then you're not the winning bidder. That money at the time is still out. Right? So it's frustrating. Right?
Interesting.
So the question was asked before about perhaps we're going through another cycle here. We're at the end of it. I think the paper that's been written the last 5 or 6, 7 years is so much better because of Dodd-Frank and the CFPB that even if we do go through another correction, we may not have all the opportunity that we've had, because there just may not be as much bad debt or good debt that's been created here recently. So from a long-term vision, as you're looking at your note business and kind of from all three of you guys' perspective, how do you see your note business evolving over the next couple of years based on where you think the economy's heading? Jared, why don't you talk about that first?
About a year and a half ago, we started thinking about different ways to buy notes. I mean, like 2010, 11, 12, 13, we really stocked up on institutional notes, but notes that were coming from major banks like Wells Fargo and Chase. And we were sitting on, a couple of hundred notes. And we took quite a bit of time just working through those notes, getting them performing. And I wasn't really trying to buy more notes for a little while because I was so busy with all the notes that we had bought. And then we started getting to the point where we're kind of running out of work to do on those notes. And so I started thinking, we need to replenish our stock of notes. So I started looking at private notes, seller carryback, and notes between private parties. And so we did the research that Ellis was talking about on a kind of a big scale. We came up with about 7,000 names of people that were private note holders, all second mortgages in California, Nevada, Arizona, kind of this little area here. And so we mailed out, like I say, probably about 5,000 letters to those people. And we've had about maybe 200 responses off of that. And we bought probably 40 of those notes so far. So we've had a pretty high rate of response, plus able to close the deal. I'm buying one today for $15,000 on a note in like Lompoc.
Don't you feel you have better control over the deal too, because you're not dealing with an asset manager, you're just talking to...
You have good control, but it's also a lot of work to buy one note.
Yeah.
Whereas it used to be, a hedge fund called you up, hey Gerald, I'm selling these 50 notes, can you give me a bid? And if I can hit their price, I can close the deal. With the homeowners, it took me 18 months to buy a note. I had made an offer on a lady on a note in Yorba Linda, and she was so wishy-washy about wanting whether to sell it or not to sell it, and what's the price, and she kept blowing me off. We'd make an appointment. She's going to come into my office, sign the documents. I had a cashier's check for her, and she would call me up an hour before and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I got to go take my mom to the doctor." It's just one thing after another, and so finally, 18 months later, we closed the deal. And, that kind of a thing is frustrating. Plus, to me, the quality of the documentation, like the collateral file, a lot of times is not there. The pay history, a lot of people don't have the original note. They lost it, which is like,
What do you do in a situation like that?
I don't buy it. If
so
they have
to have the collateral file, basically the payments that were made as well as the original.
Yeah,
right?
They have to have at least a Xerox of the note. This guy didn't even have a Xerox. It was a $300,000 note on a property in Palos Verde, where he had sold the house and did a seller carryback, and he couldn't come up with any documentation whatsoever. All I have is a deed of trust. And I'd have paid him $100,000 for it, and that would have been a good deal for me. But he couldn't come up with it. So those kinds of things. But we basically had to kind of reinvent ourselves. And then since then, the funny thing is that the institutional paper has kind of come back, but it's paper that hedge funds bought, say 5 years ago, and they've worked on it for a while. Now they're tired of working on it, or they're kind of frustrated, or they're closing out a PPM, private placement memorandum, and they're wanting to liquidate their assets, like I mentioned earlier. So we're buying quite a bit of that right now.
What about you, Ellis? What are you working on? How do you see your plan evolving over the next couple of years?
One of my mentors always told me that when markets get tight and then there's a lot of competition, you just have to get better. And I was talking to you earlier about how I just have to get better at being able to clean up screwier kinds of paper, like paper that, like if there's a lost note or something, or there's a title issue, you're not going to have very many buyers for that, and I can build in my discount. So I just have to be a smarter investor and have more ways of solving these problems, because if I'm just buying kind of your generic note, anybody will buy that, and it'll just become a bidding war, right? And that's not what that's not what I'm about. I'm always trying to find the edge, trying to find a way to get a really good return, but it's all about developing your expertise. So I'm learning a lot about title and stuff like that now.
Yeah. Josh, what about your business? From dealing with investors, how do you see your business growing over the next couple of years?
Yeah, we've kind of seen it from the highs and lows, and we started out initially really dealing with private money lenders, and it kind of evolved into the note purchase business when this became a big thing, and now there's all these different seminars and groups that deal just with note purchasing. So, what I'd say is there's a lot of bad loans out there still, and I don't think people realize it. There's not a lot for sale because there's so many people that are trying to bid for these pools. But a lot of what's happened is it's been swept under the rug. I deal with a lot of modifications and forbearances and other workouts that lenders are doing. It's not necessarily solving the problem. The workouts are being done because of the regulation that's in place by the big banks in order to try and get it off their books, try and get it performing. So, I mean, my personal take is I think it's going to come back around again. I don't see that this is the end of it. I know that it's very difficult to buy these pools, and it's becoming more scarce. But I do see it coming back around. My business is we represent from the institutional lender. We represent community banks and credit unions, and private money investors, as well as no purchasers. So I kind of see it from the different aspects of the lending versus the parties that are just purchasing the pools. And lending standards, even though they have tightened because of CFPB regulations, they've gotten a lot more loose than they were, say 4 or 5 years ago. So it is going to come back around. I know I recently purchased a house because I moved to the area, and I noticed the difference on how everything was happening based on how much you needed to put down now versus what it was when the whole crisis started. So it's already starting to loosen. I don't see the non-performing loan market going away. I think it's going to come back around and probably just as strong. That's my guess. I'm not a prophet, but that's my personal take on it.
Cool. Well, it's 9 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. First of all, big hand applause. All just great info, just day-to-day type of stuff. So we have to reset this room up for meetings tomorrow morning, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up right now. When you leave here, if you could just grab your water bottles, whatever, there's trash cans everywhere. And then, I'm not joking, North Italia right over here, that's the real benefit of this thing. Head over to North Italia. These guys are going to come over, have a drink, have some food. If you've got more questions, you can ask them over there or from Matt or I. Next month is about investing for your kids, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so second Wednesday of May will be all about investing real estate from a legacy perspective, so investing for future generations. So it went out on Meetup. If you haven't, go ahead and RSVP, and we'll see you next week.
Quick announcement.
Yeah.
What I forgot to tell about our virtual show is that we're going to be doing it on a platform called Smile Time. So if you look at smiletime.com, you can find us there. We haven't launched our first show yet, but please go look it up. And if you want to add me on your Twitter account, I'll send out the information. It's FIBI USA, FIBI USA, and I'll send you out all the information. Really easy to remember. Okay? Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you, everyone.